What began as a confident declaration of independence quietly transformed into one of the most legally complex and emotionally charged dramas the K-pop industry has faced in recent years. At the center of this unfolding crisis stood Danielle, once a core pillar of NewJeans, now positioned at the edge of a collapse that threatened not only her contract, but the unity of the group itself. This story does not start with fan rumors or online speculation. It starts in a courtroom, with a ruling that would reshape everything that followed. On October 30th, the Seoul Central District Court delivered a decisive verdict. NewJeans had no legal grounds to terminate their exclusive contracts with ADOR. Every claim raised by the members was dismissed due to insufficient evidence. The court ruled that the contracts would remain fully valid until 2029. There were no massive penalties announced, no dramatic compensation figures. Instead, the decision carried something far more powerful, a binding order that placed the group firmly back under the company's authority. What many underestimated was the injunction that followed. It strictly prohibited any independent or solo activity by the members, regardless of scale or intent. In the public eye, the ruling felt like a pause rather than an ending. ADOR framed its response as an effort to stabilize the group, emphasizing control and structure instead of punishment. But beneath that calm surface, tensions were far from resolved. Each member reacted differently. Some appeared to quietly reassess their position. Others seemed restless, already drifting toward choices that would soon collide with the court's decision. At that moment, no betrayal had surfaced yet, only a fragile, calm one built on silence, uncertainty, and unresolved distrust. Because within weeks, actions taken behind closed doors would begin raising questions no legal document could answer. Who truly intended to return, and who had already stepped beyond a line that could not be uncrossed? If you want to understand how this courtroom ruling became the spark for a far deeper internal collapse, make sure to follow the channel, subscribe, and stay with us as this story continues. As the legal dust began to settle, the aftermath revealed a fracture that was no longer just about contracts, but about trust and intention. Less than 2 weeks after the court's ruling, ADOR released a carefully worded statement that immediately caught fans off guard. Only 2 members of NewJeans publicly confirmed their intention to return to the company. The language was restrained, respectful, and emphasized acceptance of the court's decision after long discussions with their families. To the public, it looked like the first step toward reconciliation. But behind that announcement, imbalance was already forming. Almost immediately, confusion spread when the remaining members issued a separate statement declaring their own intent to return as well. The timing was strange. The wording felt disconnected. And most notably, it was not coordinated with ADOR. What should have been a unified message instead exposed cracks that could no longer be ignored. ADOR responded cautiously, stating it was still assessing the sincerity and meaning behind the announcement. Quietly, alarms were raised. Private meetings followed. Parents joined the discussions. Conversations stretched on for weeks behind closed doors. Some families appeared willing to rebuild trust and move forward under the court's framework. Others remained deeply suspicious, shaped by narratives they had been exposed to long before the ruling. Reports began circulating that certain members had received distorted interpretations of the company's actions over an extended period, influencing decisions that now seemed increasingly difficult to reverse. The injunction was still active. The contracts were still binding. Yet not everyone appeared to be operating under the same understanding of those restrictions. As negotiations dragged on, one name began to surface more frequently, not in official statements, but in quiet speculation behind the scenes. Danielle. While other members were slowly negotiating their way back into compliance, questions emerged about whether Danielle had already taken steps that made returning impossible. The issue was no longer about reconciliation. It was about whether trust, once fractured, could ever be repaired. And as the group stood at this uneasy crossroads, one silent decision was already setting the next collapse into motion. By the time winter arrived, uncertainty surrounding Danielle had hardened into open confrontation. While ADOR continued holding separate discussions with each member and their families, one reality became increasingly clear behind closed doors. Unlike the others, Danielle's path was not moving toward reconciliation. Her negotiations were unraveling, growing colder and more distant with every passing week. On December 29th, ADOR released a statement that sent shockwaves through the fandom. Danielle's exclusive contract had been officially terminated. The announcement was brief but heavy with implication. According to the company, after prolonged discussions, it had become impossible to continue working together with Danielle as both an artist and a member of NewJeans. This was not framed as a sudden decision, but as the result of a long breakdown that could no longer be repaired. What escalated the situation further was ADOR's declaration that legal accountability would be pursued against a member of Danielle's family and a former executive. They were identified as key figures responsible for the dispute and the prolonged delay in the group's return. For many fans, this marked the moment when the narrative shifted. What once felt like a misunderstanding now resembled open warfare. The timing made the divide even more striking. Other members were actively reflecting, reassessing, and in some cases choosing to respect the court's ruling. Danielle, however, stood alone. ADOR emphasized that while another member realigned with the company after objective reflection, Danielle had not. The implication was unmistakable. This separation had been forming long before the public announcement. Speculation intensified when reports suggested the termination was tied not to public statements, but to actions taken quietly during the injunction period. Actions that, if confirmed, would represent more than resistance. They would represent a direct violation of a court order. And once that line was crossed, there was no return. The question was no longer whether Danielle would come back. It was what she had done to make that impossible. As the public tried to make sense of Danielle's sudden termination, the reason behind it began to surface in fragments, quietly, and far more unsettling than anyone expected. According to alleged industry insiders, the core issue was not public defiance or emotional statements, but a serious breach of contract carried out in silence. Despite the court's injunction clearly prohibiting any independent or solo activities, Danielle was accused of moving forward alone while her exclusive contract with ADOR remained legally binding. At the center of the controversy was an alleged luxury watch brand deal. Originally, NewJeans was expected to enter a three-party agreement involving the group, ADOR, and the brand. This structure is standard in the K-pop industry, designed to protect all sides and maintain transparency. However, during the dispute period, Danielle allegedly proceeded with a separate two-party contract, excluding both the company and the group entirely. What made the situation explosive was that these activities were reportedly concealed. ADOR was said to have believed Danielle's overseas schedules were connected to the original group agreement until expected payments failed to appear. When the truth surfaced, the implications were severe. If proven, it meant not only a breach of contract, but a direct violation of a court order. More damaging still was the claim that Danielle kept these actions hidden from her fellow members. Secret negotiations, undisclosed brand deals, and solo arrangements painted the picture of someone advancing independently while the rest of the group remained legally restrained. For the other members, this was no longer about corporate control, it was about loyalty. Once this information came to light, insiders claimed the sense of betrayal within the group became irreversible. Trust collapsed completely. In an already fragile situation, that collapse forced everyone else to reassess their own positions. Because when one member breaks away in silence, everyone else is left to face the consequences together. And as the fallout widened, attention began to shift toward a figure who had remained in the shadows for far too long. As the final pieces fell into place, attention shifted to a presence that had quietly shaped the conflict from the beginning. Danielle's mother. According to multiple reports, she was not a passive observer but an active force behind the scenes, deeply involved in strategic decisions during the dispute. Allegedly, she maintained close communication with former executives and outside investors, promoting alternative paths while framing departure from ADOR as freedom rather than risk. The situation escalated when claims surfaced that she interfered directly with the return process of other members. Meetings were delayed, messages were filtered, families were exposed to conflicting narratives. One case drew particular concern: Hanni. Facing language barriers and unfamiliarity with Korea's legal system, Hanni and her family were reportedly vulnerable to misinformation. What should have been a straightforward dialogue with the company instead became weeks of confusion and hesitation. Perhaps most controversially, Danielle's mother was accused of encouraging Hanni to act as the group's public spokesperson during the height of the backlash, placing her at the center of criticism while others remained shielded. Whether intentional or not, the outcome was irreversible. When Hanni later spoke directly with ADOR, resistance gave way to reflection. By the end, NewJeans was no longer five. Contracts were terminated, lawsuits followed, trust was shattered, and Danielle stood alone, facing consequences that went far beyond any legal document. If you want to stay updated as more truths emerge and this battle continues, make sure to subscribe, like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and turn on notifications. The next chapter may change everything.